Welcome to the Deep Dive, and today we're going to explore something super interesting,
Yeah.
how we talk about gender.
Absolutely. And we've got some really fascinating articles from the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit website.
Yeah, all about gender studies and discourse analysis.
Definitely a topic that can really make you think differently about the world around us,
Oh, for sure. I think this is going to be a really eye-opening deep
I
dive.
think so, too.
But maybe we should start with the basics for folks who are just tuning in.
Yeah, sounds good.
What exactly are discourse analysis and gender studies, and how do they kind of come together?
So discourse analysis really dives into how people use language in different situations to make meaning. And it goes beyond just like the words themselves. It looks at the context, nonverbal cues, power dynamics, all that.
Merkel picture.
The whole picture.
Got it.
And gender studies, that focuses on how societal expectations about gender affect our lives.
Okay.
All of our lives.
So, we're not just looking at the words, but what those words tell us about the social rules and power structures around gender.
Exactly. And when we bring these two fields together, you get gender studies in discourse analysis, which explores how our communication really shapes our understanding of gender.
And I feel like this is where that famous quote comes in.
Yeah.
Simone de Beauvoir. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman.
Powerful quote.
It really highlights how much of gender is learned and performed, right?
Right. It's not something that's just fixed from birth,
Yeah, it's like we're constantly being shaped by the messages we receive from society, and a lot of those messages come through language.
Absolutely. And that's where Michel Foucault's work is so important.
Okay.
He said that discourses, the ways we talk about things, are never neutral.
Interesting.
They reflect and reinforce the power dynamics of the time.
So basically, the language we use to talk about gender could actually be contributing to inequality.
Yes, it can definitely play a role in perpetuating those inequalities.
That's pretty profound.
It is, but the good news is
Yeah.
the more we understand these dynamics, the better we can challenge them, right?
Right. Knowledge is power, as they say.
Exactly, and that's what we're doing here, trying to understand these complex issues so we can create a more equitable world.
Okay, I'm all for that.
Me too.
Now, I know the articles we're looking at today dive into some real-world examples,
Yes, they do.
especially in politics, which I always find fascinating.
Me too, especially how women leaders navigate that space.
Totally, like they're constantly under the microscope.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to see how they use language to navigate those challenges.
For sure.
To establish their authority and get their messages across.
Absolutely. I think a great example of this is like Margaret Thatcher and Angela Merkel.
Oh, excellent examples, yeah.
They were both such powerful women, but with really different styles.
Completely different approaches.
The Iron Lady versus Mutti Merkel, it's like such a contrast.
It really is, and their language really reflected those differences.
So how did their language actually differ, I'm curious?
Well, Thatcher, with that Iron Lady persona, she actually went through voice training to lower her pitch.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it was a strategic decision to project authority in a world where women's voices were often seen as less, powerful.
Makes you think about how even something like pitch can be used strategically
Oh, yeah, for sure.
to play the game, basically.
Absolutely.
Did Merkel do anything similar?
She took a completely different approach.
Okay.
She really embraced a more collaborative style,
Got it.
more pragmatic, which earned her that nickname, Mutti, or mother, right?
Right.
She kind of avoided strong emotional displays and opted for that calm, rational tone.
It makes you wonder if they were playing into those existing stereotypes,
Yeah.
Thatcher being more assertive, that kind of traditionally masculine approach.
Yeah.
And then Merkel leaning into a more nurturing feminine style.
It's really interesting to think about.
But they both achieved incredible success.
They did, which shows that there's no one right way for women to lead.
Right.
And it challenges the idea that only certain traits, like assertiveness, are effective in leadership.
So even when the system kind of favors certain communication styles,
Right.
women can find ways to succeed and even change those norms a little bit.
Exactly. They demonstrate that, empathy and collaboration can be just as effective.
Yeah, for sure.
So important.
It makes me think about how these dynamics show up in the workplace.
Yeah, that's another area where language and gender are really intertwined.
Totally.
I mean, think about all the research on communication styles and how they impact women's experiences at work.
I'm thinking of Robin Lakoff's work on women's language.
Yes, classic work.
Didn't she argue that women being too polite or apologetic could actually hurt them professionally?
Exactly.
Like makes them seem less confident.
Right. She pointed out those features that are often associated with politeness, like hedging or apologizing. Those, I might be wrong, but, or I'm so sorry to bother you kind of phrases.
Yeah.
Which are intended to be courteous, obviously.
Right.
But they can make women appear less assertive, especially in fields where directness is valued.
So it's like women are penalized for being too nice. In a way.
In a way, yes. It creates that double bind.
Right, yeah.
Where if they're assertive, they're seen as aggressive, but if they're too polite, they're seen as lacking competence.
It's like a lose-lose situation.
It can be, yeah. It really highlights those limitations of these deeply ingrained gender expectations.
For sure.
Deborah Cameron actually offered a slightly different perspective on this.
Oh, okay. What did she say?
She argued that communication styles aren't just determined by gender, but they're influenced by all sorts of factors.
Yeah.
The context, the power dynamics, individual personality. It's much more complex than just saying men talk this way, women talk that way.
So while Lakoff pointed out these patterns,
yeah.
Cameron is saying it's not so black and white.
Exactly. There's a lot more nuance to it.
We're all individuals.
Yes.
And our communication reflects that.
Absolutely.
Not just our gender.
Right.
Now, all this talk about language and power dynamics makes me think about the online world.
The online world, for sure.
Especially social media, which was like its own universe of communication.
Totally.
The articles mentioned Susan Herring's research in this area.
Yeah, really important work.
What are some of the key findings there?
Well, Herring's work shows how online spaces can both mirror and reshape how we understand gender.
Okay.
She documented these differences in how men and women communicate online. Women often use more supportive and polite language, while men tend towards more assertive or even confrontational styles.
So it's like those patterns we talked about in the workplace are also playing out online.
They are.
Are there any unique things about online communication that affect how gender is expressed?
Oh, yeah.
Like what?
Well, one interesting thing is that the anonymity of online spaces can allow for more fluidity in gender expression.
I see.
People can experiment with different identities and ways of communicating that they might not feel comfortable with offline.
It's like the internet can be a double-edged sword.
Yes,
So
exactly.
you can reinforce existing norms, but also create space for challenging them.
It's a really fascinating dynamic.
It is.
It makes you wonder how all these online interactions are shaping our understanding of gender offline, you know?
Yeah, it's all connected.
Right.
It's funny. As we're talking, I'm realizing how many messages about gender we see every day.
It's constant, isn't it?
It really is, both online and offline.
Yeah.
But how much of this is actually baked into language itself?
That's the big question.
Is language inherently gendered? You know what I mean?
That's a really important question, and it takes us into some of the core theories of this field.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into those theories.
Let's do it.
Let's see what they can tell us about the real power of language.
One theory that really helps us understand how language shapes our views on gender is Judith Butler's idea of gender performativity.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
It suggests that gender isn't something we just are, inherently. It's something we actively do.
We perform it.
Through our actions, behaviors, and of course, our language.
So it's not about having a fixed gender identity.
No.
It's about constantly performing it through our interactions.
Exactly. Think about it.
Okay.
The clothes we choose, how we move, the way we talk, even our online personas.
Right.
All of that contributes to how we express and perform our gender.
It's like we're always putting on a show, in a way.
In a way, yes. And through those repeated performances, we end up reinforcing all the societal norms about what it means to be, masculine or feminine.
So if language can be used to create and reinforce those norms, could it also be used to challenge them, you think?
Absolutely. That's where things get really interesting.
Okay, tell me more.
One area of research that looks at this is called queer linguistics.
Queer linguistics.
Okay, and it focuses on how LGBTQ plus communities use language to resist and subvert those traditional gender categories.
So they're kind of like rewriting the rules.
In a way, yeah.
The articles mention Rusty Barrett as a key figure in this field.
Oh, yeah. Barrett's work is fascinating.
What did he find?
Well, he studied how LGBTQ plus communities use language to express their identities, build community, and challenge all that discriminatory language and practices out there.
Okay.
They're reclaiming slurs, creating new pronouns, and even bending grammatical rules
Wow.
to express identities that don't fit into that traditional binary.
It's like they're hacking the system, but with language.
I like that. Hacking the system. It's a great way to put it.
It really shows how language can be a tool for liberation, not just oppression.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder of the creative potential of language.
You know, we've been talking a lot about the impact on women and LGBTQ plus communities, but what about men?
Yeah.
How does this all relate to their experiences?
Well, the research on masculinity actually offers some really interesting insights here.
Okay.
Specifically, R.W. Connell's concept of hegemonic masculinity.
Hegemonic masculinity, that sounds intense.
It is a bit of a mouthful.
What does it actually mean?
Basically, it refers to that idealized version of masculinity that's often associated with power, dominance, and heterosexuality.
The stereotypical manly man.
Yeah, think like the strong, silent type in movies.
Right.
Or the classic action hero.
Okay, so how does this ideal become hegemonic? Like, how does it get so much power?
Well, through discourse, of course.
Of course.
It's the language we use, the stories we tell, the images we see everywhere.
It's everywhere.
It's all around us, and it all contributes to constructing this very narrow definition of what it means to be a real man, you know?
It's like this invisible pressure to conform.
It is, and it's not just men who perpetuate it.
Oh, interesting.
Women can unknowingly reinforce it through their language and behavior as well.
It's like a self-perpetuating cycle.
Yeah, it's really ingrained in our culture.
And it can have real consequences for men who don't fit that mold.
Oh, absolutely.
They might feel pressure to suppress their emotions or act in certain ways.
Exactly. They might get told to man up or be ridiculed for showing vulnerability.
It's a reminder that these ideas about language aren't just theoretical. They have a real impact on people's lives.
They do, and that's why this whole field of study is so important.
Yeah, because it helps us see these dynamics and understand how they work so we can start to challenge them.
Precisely.
But we also have to acknowledge that there are critiques of this field.
Of course, like any area of study, it's not without its critics.
What are some of the main concerns people have raised?
One common criticism is that it can overemphasize the social construction of gender
Okay.
at the expense of biological factors.
Like the whole nature versus nurture debate.
Exactly. How much is biology? How much is environment?
Right.
And some argue that this field leans too heavily on the nurture side.
But it doesn't completely deny biology, does it?
No, not at all. It's more about understanding how those biological differences are interpreted and given meaning within different social and cultural contexts.
Okay, so it's about how society shapes our understanding of those differences.
That's a good way to put it.
What other criticisms are there?
Another critique is that the field can sometimes focus too much on power and oppression and maybe overlook the agency and resilience of individuals.
Like we're all just victims of the system.
It's a valid concern. You know, if we only focus on the problems, we might miss those opportunities to empower people.
Right, to create change.
Exactly. So it's crucial to acknowledge those systems of oppression, but also to recognize the strength and resilience of individuals and communities who navigate and resist those systems.
Finding that balance is key.
It is.
Another point raised in the articles is that this type of research can be a bit subjective, based on interpretation.
Right.
It can be hard to prove a direct cause and effect relationship.
That's true. It often relies on qualitative methods like analyzing language, which are great for understanding complex social phenomena, but it can be tricky to pinpoint those direct causal links.
So how do you address that?
One way is to incorporate more quantitative methods.
Like stats and experiments.
Exactly, to provide more concrete evidence.
So a more mixed methods approach could be helpful.
Absolutely. Combining the richness of qualitative data with the rigor of quantitative data.
That makes sense.
And also being transparent about the limitations of our research.
Yeah, acknowledging what we don't know.
Exactly, and being honest about the fact that we're dealing with complex systems.
Where there's not always a simple answer.
Right, and that willingness to acknowledge limitations and keep striving for improvement, that's a sign of a healthy field.
It's like we're all on this journey of discovery together.
I like that, a journey of discovery.
Always learning, always refining our understanding. One of the more controversial critiques is that this field is politically biased, specifically towards the left.
That's a critique that often comes up, especially when research challenges the status quo.
It's understandable.
And it's true that this field is often informed by critical perspectives that aim to challenge systems of oppression.
So would you say it's inherently political?
I think it's important to distinguish between political and partisan.
Like,
This field is about understanding how gender functions in society, how power operates, and how language plays a role.
right.
Those are inherently political issues, but that doesn't mean it's tied to a specific political party or ideology.
So the research might challenge certain power structures,
Yes,
but it's not about pushing a specific political agenda.
exactly. But the goal is to do rigorous research
Mm-hmm.
that helps us understand these complex issues of gender, research that's open to critique from all sides.
That makes sense. Good science should be about questioning assumptions and being open to different perspectives.
Absolutely, that open-mindedness is what keeps this field so dynamic and exciting.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. There's always more to discover.
And speaking of layers, I think it's time to move on to the final layer of our deep dive.
Okay.
Exploring the potential future directions for this field. So where do we go from here with all this?
Yeah. What's next for gender studies and discourse analysis?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is finding that balance,
Balance between what?
between addressing those critiques we talked about, but also staying true to the field's commitment to, social justice and challenging inequality.
Right. It's like walking a tightrope almost.
Yeah, it is, but it's important work.
What is some ways forward then?
I think embracing methodological pluralism is really important.
Methodological what now?
Pluralism, it basically means using a bunch of different research methods,
Okay.
both qualitative and quantitative, to get a more well-rounded picture of how gender actually works in the world.
So not just relying on one type of research.
Right, exactly. By combining different methods, we can address some of those concerns about, proving cause and effect and being too subjective.
That makes sense.
And when it comes to those critiques about political bias, I think intellectual humility is key.
Like being aware of our own biases.
Exactly. We have to be willing to challenge our own assumptions and be open to different perspectives.
So being self-aware and open-minded.
Yes. And actively creating space for diverse voices in the field.
So having those tough conversations with people who might disagree with us.
Exactly, because that's how we learn and grow.
I keep thinking about how technology adds another layer of complexity to all of this.
Oh yeah, technology definitely changes the game.
We talked about how online spaces can reflect and reshape gender norms, but it feels like we're just starting to scratch the surface of how technology impacts our understanding of gender.
We are. There's so much more to explore, especially with things like social media, artificial intelligence, virtual reality.
It's like a whole new world of communication.
It is, and it raises so many questions about how these technologies are affecting our perceptions of gender and how they can be used to both reinforce and challenge those traditional norms.
Like our algorithms shaping how we see gender.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And how are people using avatars to explore different gender identities?
Right, and how are online communities creating new spaces for activism and resistance?
That's a whole other deep dive right there.
It really is. We could talk for hours about this.
So much to unpack, but I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. It's been a great discussion.
Why should someone who's not a gender studies expert care about all this?
Because understanding how language and discourse shape our views on gender can be really empowering. Once you see those patterns, you can start to challenge them.
So it's about being more aware of our own biases
Yeah, and using language more consciously.
and intentionally.
Exactly. Recognizing that language isn't neutral, it has power.
Power to shape our realities.
Mhm.
And by understanding that power, we can work towards creating a more just and equitable world for everyone.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, there you have it, folks, our deep dive into the world of gender studies in discourse analysis.
It's been a pleasure.
I don't know about you, but I've learned a lot today.
Me too. It's been a great conversation.
As you go about your day, think about what resonated with you, what surprised you, what new questions do you have.
Keep those minds engaged.
Until next time, happy deep diving.